Hey, welcome to today's podcast. I'm going to be breaking down how my client did just shy of $1 million in 6 months. He hit $934,000 in revenue generated on the offer that he was on. And that's just shy of six figures in commission with an average of about $15,000 a month in 6 months. So we're going to break down all the lessons, all the breakthroughs, all of the major coaching themes that we went through in order to get him here. But you're probably thinking, how the hell did he hit those numbers? So for the stat nerds listening, there was 220 total live calls taken. Of those live calls, 81 of them closed with an average close rate of 37% and an average sale of $10,947. That's how we got to the $934,000 in 6 months. When we first started, when we were working together, he was hitting around $60,000 in revenue a month. And that obviously massively increased within the 6 months of working together. So let's get straight into the lessons and break it all down so that you can actually turn your 2026 into one of your biggest years yet. So the first thing that I want to talk about here, the first major realization that he had was, in most cases, most of the clients that I work with that are in sales don't necessarily have a sales skill issue. They have a consistency issue. So what I mean by this is, what I've seen with most sales reps is they're incredibly emotional, right? What makes them really good at what they do is that they're highly emotionally intelligent beings, socially intelligent, etc., able to ask the right questions, dig for pain, all that kind of stuff. But when they have a down month, that down month really affects their performance. They identify with their performance. So if they're not at that 40% close ratio, then they really struggle to detach that from their identity and their worth. And that creates this inconsistency. Now, the other thing that I've noticed as well is when they keep telling themselves that they have a sales skill issue, they keep looking for more skills. So they get more indoctrinated in different ideas, different philosophies, different processes. They don't stick and master the one process. They don't commit consistently and long enough on one framework to get really good at it, to consistently produce that performance over time, to actually get the result. Instead, what they do is they get all these different skills, they're trying to mesh them all together, and they just kind of feel overwhelmed, or they tell themselves like, oh, I'm not great at objection handling, or like I'm not good at pain, or I'm not good at future, or I'm not good at discovery, I'm not good at closing, all these things. Chances are, if you are already making around $10,000 a month in commission, the journey to $20,000 and beyond is not necessarily more skills. It's the consistency of your ability to perform, which brings us to our next thing that we sort of navigated a couple of times, was self-sabotage. So one of the themes that came up a couple of times during the coaching was he would start to sabotage his results when they would go really well. So for example, you'd have an incredibly massive month, do really, really well. And then he would just slow down. He'd pull back. He would go off script. He wouldn't follow the framework anymore. He would stop doing his call reviews, right? We wouldn't role play. We wouldn't talk about the things that, or keep doing the things that actually got him there. And so sabotage tends to happen. There's this phenomenon, it's a really good book. It's called Gary Hendricks, The Big Leap, Giant Leap, where I want you to imagine there's this upper ceiling of performance. And this upper ceiling, this glass ceiling that we come up against is like, this is the most that your nervous system is comfortable handling. And I'm going to do a whole podcast on this for you. But basically, as soon as you get close to that upper ceiling, I want you to imagine it's like a thermometer, right? Where you get to the top of the thermometer, there's no more room for it to go. So instead of blasting through the top of the thermometer, it just stops, it just stalls, and then it stops performing. And this is what I've noticed with pretty much every single sales rep that I've worked with. At some point, they reach their glass ceiling. And it's not necessarily, again, it's not a skill issue. It's an emotional issue. It's a mindset issue to keep them being consistent. Because what typically happens is they reach that upper ceiling, they reach that glass ceiling, and then they sabotage, right? They have a poor month or a couple of bad months in a row. And so they get into the valley of inconsistent performance and they suck, and they tell themselves they suck, and then they shame themselves, and it spirals all the way down. Then it gets so shit that they go, well, I need to do something about it. So they start doing something about it, then they start performing again. And this is this feast and famine cycle that we see in the commission structure that just, it hampers performance, right? It's really detrimental for producing consistently great results over time. So there's a self-sabotage piece, and there's some other things that go in there as well, where like, again, telling yourself that story that I don't have enough sales skill. Most of the time you have enough. It's the consistency of sticking to the process and the framework that works, mastering the one framework before you start getting fancy and adding things to it. The next thing I would say is the ability to navigate sales slumps with grace. And this is a big one that I've seen, where we was alluding to this before, where if a bad month or a bad week happens, letting that define the rest of the month's performance. It is a funny quote. It's like, would you let one bad minute of the day ruin the rest of the, I probably butchered that, but that's, I think, the quote that comes to mind. And this is really important when you're playing the long game or the macro game, or you have a specific goal in mind, is in sales, you're going to have these rough weeks or even days, right? Or even couple of weeks. And you might go through this phase of miss a sale, miss a sale, miss a sale, miss a sale. And it's looking like your performance sucks. But then all of a sudden, at the end of the week, you just have this golden streak where everybody closes. Now, in your mind, you feel like you failed or you're not closing at your average 37% or whatever. But by the end of the month, when you actually look at the macro numbers, you look at the big picture, you'll see that on average, you still hit those numbers. And this is how you navigate sales slumps, is your macro numbers. So instead of the day to day, what is my day to day close rate? What is my 7-day average? What is my 14-day average? Heck, what is my 30-day average? And you focus on the things that you can control. So you can only control the quality in which you show up to the call that's in front of you. You can't control the calls that, for whatever reason, could be market conditions, it could be just timing, like it could be end of year, it could be Christmas, like whatever. It could be all these conditions that you can't control, which is causing the delay. So we need to focus on the things that we can control, focus on the macro numbers, the things that the law of averages kicks in. If you knock on 10 doors and historically you've closed 37, you should make 3.7 sales by the end of the month. The best way to sort of iterate this was when I first started my business back in 2016, and I left my job. I wrote down historically, I'd converted might have been 30% of the people that I talked to into offers. And so I knew I wanted to hit $10,000 a month, and I was selling a $10,000 product. So basically I needed, 10, no, was it 10? It was 30 calls at a 30% close ratio, which was 9 clients. So I basically had this number on my wall. It was 30, big 30. And I was like, cool, I only need to reach 30 calls and then 9 of them become clients. And the crazy thing was, and I just left my job, I had about 2 to 3 months worth of revenue in the bank to sustain myself. And I got to, I think it was like 21 no's in a row. So I had pitched 21 times and I hadn't closed a single deal. Now, historically, I'd closed 30%. So I was expecting 6 clients, right? And in that moment, I was like, holy shit, I'm screwed. Like, I'm absolutely ruined. This was a terrible idea. I should have never left my job. I'm an idiot. But the law of averages kicked in, and the next 9 proposals that I had made, they all signed. So I ended up doing close to about $96,000 within a very short period of time. It was about 6 weeks. But in total, we say like 90 days. So it was a 90-day process that I was looking to book 10 calls a month, convert 3 of those, but all of the clients came in the last 6 weeks. So this is the law of averages in effect. And this is what tends to happen with salespeople. And it's very difficult if you don't have accountability and coaching to get yourself through those emotional slumps and to focus on the bigger macro picture if you don't have someone coaching you one-on-one to help pull you through that. And this is what I was talking about in the first one, where it's like this consistency of performance, that's actually what drives the higher commission. It's not necessarily a magical skill that's missing. It's an internal game. It's an emotional development that'll get there. So the next one that caused a little bit of strife was company politics. And this is probably a bigger issue than most people would admit, is like being able to stay out of company politics, being able to stay sold on your offer. And this has happened in a couple of clients that have done over $1 million that I've worked with, whereby something has happened internally with the company. The founder's been weird, or they've done something not quite right, etc. And then that affects their view of the company's offering, right? So the leader has done something that then taints the way the person sees the offer. And because they see the offer differently, that affects how they feel about selling it. And that shows up in their conversion. So if you believe that the founder is like an asshole and a dickhead and doesn't have his shit together, naturally that feeling transfers to the offer, which transfers to your enthusiasm and your congruence and your certainty in selling that offer to prospects. And this was a big one that had sort of happened for my client, is there was a lot of politicking going on in the company that he was in. And so we had to find a way to carefully, calmly, and respectfully set boundaries, but also continue what he was doing, right? Trusting his system, trusting his process. Not easy when you are in that politics, and it's almost like you kind of just smile and eat shit a lot of the time. But knowing how to regulate yourself through that, calm the nervous system, detach what is not true, don't respond in anger, all of that emotional intelligence stuff was really important to getting him to stay out of it, to stay and just focus on the things that were making him money rather than worrying about things that he couldn't control. So the next one is knowing your constraints and avoiding burnout. This client actually went over to Bali, so he was crushing it so well, he decided to go nomadic. And he actually realized that going nomadic and being in another country wasn't conducive to performance. And this is really key about knowing constraints. Is for a while he was doing 5 to 6 appointments, and what he noticed in 5 to 6 appointments a day was that he had no downtime during the day, so he had no recuperation time. Those hit the quality of the calls that he took later in the day just started not being great, and so and when he was traveling, that travel kind of disrupted that everyday certainty, the routine that he had, it was disrupted during travel. It meant that he couldn't perform at the level that he wanted to. And so this is another really critical lesson here around knowing your constraints to avoid burnout. He got back from Bali and it took him a good 2, 3 weeks to get back into his routine, to get his energy back, to start performing again, because he traveled, he disrupted his routine, he learned a new routine. It didn't work so well. He came back. So it was a whole kind of month there where his performance tanked, because he really values certainty and routine, and you don't have that when you travel and you're nomadic. And so the other thing here is knowing your constraints, knowing that if you do more than 3 calls, 4 calls a day or 5 calls a day or whatever it is for you, and this is the critical thing, right? Is you need to know your limit. So he knew he was no good at 6. He tried 5, didn't like 5. He tried 4, and that was the sweet spot. And that's what helped him avoid the burnout. Because another thing that we see, is the people that do like 7 days a week, 6 calls a day. There's nothing necessarily wrong with that, but you've got to know your constraint. You've got to know your personal volume. And that's the key to avoiding burnout, but it's also the key to sustainability. So he can sustain 4 calls a day continually. Other days he can do a little bit more if he wants to. And he also, he has to do admin on top of that, which let's just say is like a bonus thing, is learning how to outsource that admin and hiring VAs to help do that for you. But the key thing here is knowing your constraints. How many calls are you willing to take? Now that decision that you make influences how big your business will grow or how big your commission will grow. And this is what it has been for me, is because we don't do mass programs, all of our work is bespoke, it's one-on-one. I build relationships with clients and work together for a long period of time. I don't have infinite amount of time to scale. So I have a smaller volume of business. However, that's my constraint, right? I know that I have X amount of time for X amount of clients. So that means my income is capped at X amount until I create something more leveraged. But I'm okay with that because that's my constraint. I really like one-on-one coaching. I like the relationship that we have over time and how we grow and how we support, etc., more than I love group coaching. However, there's a trade-off there. So if you're only booking 4 calls a day, and you're only taking 4 calls a day, that's obviously going to affect the total volume of calls you can take in a month. If you're only working 5 days a week, that's 20 calls a week, that's 80 total. Let's assume a 20% no-show rate. So you're looking at around 64 live calls, and then we extrapolate those numbers out, right? So 64 live calls, let's say you convert 30% of them, 64 times 30% is about 20 closes at an average close of 11,000 is $210,000 a month. At a 10% commission, there's your $20,000 in commission. So you've got to know your numbers. You've got to know your constraints, because that'll inform how much income that you're going to make. I hope I got those numbers right. It'd be funny if I didn't, but you kind of get the idea, right? Is know your constraints, know your numbers, know what that allows you to do, know the constraints of your offer, right? Because each offer will have different conversions. Some audiences that you're selling to are a lot colder than others. You have to do a lot more heavy lifting as a salesperson. And this is why it's really important to know accurately what you're comparing yourself against. Compare accurately. Like when you see people closing, like, oh, I closed 60% of the leads, the offer makes a difference, right? Like if really, really good marketing systems will make shitty salespeople look great. Really bad marketing systems will make great salespeople look shit, because there's a difference between educating your audience and closing. And I believe that as a closer, you should be able to do both, but most of your job should not have to be educating an audience. That's the job of marketing. Marketing should bring people to you that are at least in the stages of awareness, problem aware. In the best case scenario, they're aware of their problems. And a lot of the offers that I've seen, you end up dealing with people that have just no awareness. And so part of your job as a salesperson becomes to make them aware, and then to turn them into problem aware, and then obviously solution aware, and then most aware. And I was working on an offer, a real estate offer. And this was the issue, is like, coming into the calls, the prospects had no idea what was going on, just completely no clue at all. And then the salespeople were trying to close these people who had no idea, no qualification, no real understanding of what's going on, just showing up looking to buy a $50,000 offer, but they had like $1,000 in the bank account. And that's an example of like bad marketing, right? Where they're expecting the salespeople to do all the heavy lifting, when in reality, it's marketing's job to get them to a certain point, and then sales takes over. So I trust it was valuable today. This is how my client had $934,000 in 6 months, and some of the major lessons that I hope are valuable to you. In our next episode, I'll go a little bit deeper into the understanding of self-sabotage and upper limits and that kind of thing, and hope that gives you a lot of value today. If not, I will see you in the next one. Thank you so much for tuning in. Give us a like, comment, and a review. We'd really appreciate it, and I will speak to you soon.